Hey guys, I'm going to do a gable stud or a pattern of gable studs based on RT55 as Eric has shown you in the manual. Now with this, I'm going to lay this out on a whiteboard. This is 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. It is the same as a 2x4 that we would get from the store, except mine's in a whiteboard form. All of our calculations were done theoretically down to the center of our gable stud. So I've got a mark here down the center. The other thing that we do know about RT55 is it is an 8-in-12 roof, or an 8-12 slope. So, dealing with our gable studs, we know that we have to deal with a height above plate and a depth of bird's mouth. I don't have a common rafter laid out here for this example yet, so I'm going to do a plumb cut of an 8-in-12 or an 8-12 slope. So on my rise of 8 inches and on my run of 12 inches, I'm going to lay out a plumb cut. On that plumb cut, I have to determine 1/3, 2/3, because what I want to do here is show this using 2/3 height above plate. So I'm going to do the old level 1 trick, and I'm going to pick a number that is divisible by 3. Here I'll pick 0 and 6. 0 and 6, and if I want 2/3 above my plate, I'm going to put a mark at the 4. That will leave me 2/3 up here for my height above plate, and 1/3 for my depth of bird's mouth in the length of my plumb cut. When I go and measure those, I'm just going to get my tape measure. If I measure this, starting at the 12, my height above plate is 2 and 13 sixteenths. 2 and 13 sixteenths is my height above plate. My depth of bird's mouth, DOB, almost like date of birth, but not. I have 1 3/8, inch and 3/8 depth of bird's mouth. So those are the two numbers I'm going to need when I go to do out my layout. Now we determined that our first stud was 5.5 inches from the corner. When we change that over to units and multiply it by our unit rise of 8 inches per unit, I came up with 3 11 sixteenths. At 3 11 sixteenths, I will put my mark right down the center. So this is the theoretical length of 3 11 sixteenths. From there, I have to lengthen it, my height above plate, which I just determined to be 2 and 13 sixteenths. I go from there, 2 and 13 sixteenths, 2 and 13 sixteenths, again, right up the center mark. This is my height above plate. So I had to add my height above plate from my theoretical. I then have to shorten it, my depth of bird's mouth, which was 1 3/8 inches. I'll shorten that 1 3/8 inches. Once again, directly down my theoretical center point. This is my depth of bird's mouth. So from my original, first I lengthened it, the height above plate, then back to my original mark, my theoretical length, I shortened it, my depth of bird's mouth. From there, I have to do my side cut. I know this is an 8-12, so I'm just going to slide this out a bit. Using my square and going on 8 and 12, I'm going to do gable studs for the left side of the roof. 8 inch on my rise, 12 inch on my run. So let me see the 12 inch again. 8 and 12. I will then take those marks directly through the center. And down at the bottom by my depth of bird's mouth. On the 8 and 12 through the center. Apologize for this. I'm trying to self-film this with the camera right in my face. That now is my side cuts. Now up at the top, we spoke about that we would want to shorten our gable stud just in case our common rafter, which sits right in here, was ever to shrink. We do not want our gable stud poking up and making a hump on the roof. So I will shorten that. I like to shorten that about 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go 1/4 inch and I will shorten that. Again, same marks, 8 and 12. You see, I'm going to go mark the opposite side of the square. Doesn't really matter, still holding the same slope. 8 and 12, right there. That's where that will actually end up being cut. Now, our gable stud. It is notched 1.5 inches. So down the side here, I'm going to flop this over. Here's where I've shortened it to. That, woo! So knock this over. That has to be squared all the way across. That's where it would physically be cut. Our common rafter is going to sit in here flush. So I'm going to notch it or let it in 1.5 inches. So from here, it is let in 1.5 inches. That will only be down to where my bottom of the seat lays there. So this will now all be removed. Along the face, this would all be removed. And now down the opposite side, from our short point here, that would be squared across. That would be physically cut off there as well. Again, because I let it in 1.5 inches on the other side, it's the same thing on this side. I draw it a little bit too far. And here, following this angle, it would be cut down. I'm just going to transfer that mark across. So here, this is also removed. So now you can kind of get the look of what is being taken out. I would take this, cut it directly all the way through here. Then I am notching out that 1.5 inches at my 8 and 12 there, all the way through. That way my common rafter can sit right in there, nice and flush when I stand this up. Next thing I have to do is my difference in length. If these are traveling 16 inch on center, we divide that by 12 to change it to units. We get 1.33333 repeating. We then times that number of units by 8-inch rise, and we get a difference in length of studs of 10 and 11/16. Rather than doing this whole thing again and adding 10 and 11/16 to this, all I really have to do is, once I have one stud cut, and it will be cut right here, I can just go from there, 10 and 11/16. So I'm going to make this longer by 10 and 11/16, which will put me to 20 and 11/16 from this point. I also know that it's 10 and 11/16 from this point. So they're at 20 and 11/16. Rather than going through all the steps again with 8 and 12 and doing my side cuts, I'm going to take my sliding key. I'm going to set it to that angle. I will then transfer these two marks down. This will all be removed, and I can do the same thing and square down and across the sides. Going down here, 1.5 inches, down here, 1.5 inches. This, would be cut all the way through. Knowing that that is 1.5 inches, I'm just going to drag that across, finger gauge it across. This will be removed. That will be removed. Squaring these across. And bringing this across at 1.5 inches. That will be cut off there. That will be removed as well. That is my second one already done. I can continue on pulling 10 and 11/16 from each of these points up and continue with how many gable studs that I do actually need. I'm just going to highlight the cut marks here. On my first one, it will be cut. After lengthening it, my height above plate, and shortening it my depth of bird's mouth. This one isn't going to change any, but my height above plate, I shortened it a little bit to bring it down. That will be notched out there. Flipping this over. Physically cut there, and on this side, that will be cut out. So there you have it. Original mark, which was in this case 3 11/16. We lengthened it height above plate to this point here. We then shortened it square to the plumb, just so that it wouldn't stick out over top of the common rafter. It's a common rafter if it was to shrink. And back from our original mark, we shortened it the depth of our bird's mouth, which in this case was 1 3/8 inches. Then our difference in lengths of studs was 10 11/16. I used each of these points to pull 10 11/16 up to here for my long point, and 10 11/16 up from there to my short point. I then did the same thing, and I would notch this out. One thing we could do a little bit different if we were doing this as a pattern is we may just square this across. At this point, I could have a square mark. If I put a square mark across here, now when I grab another piece of stock and put it up beside here, I could transfer this mark across, and I can make a left side cut, and I can make a right side cut. So that's just an option if we're going to use this as a pattern to put on the table for somebody to cut all of our gable studs for us.